there are weeks when decades happen. We just had 3 of those weeks back to back. I was just looking at the calendar. Let's say 3 weeks ago, there was mass demonstrations across the country in response to Trump's ICE raids. By the end of the second week of the month, Israel began bombarding Iran and totally scuttled the negotiations that were taking place between the U.S. and Iran. The course of the following week, it started to have an impact on MAGA circles, and there was a total, Trumpism has been thrown into a crisis, which is now continuing. And then this last weekend, on Saturday night, the world was treated to this spectacle of Trump joining in directly in this war, striking 3 nuclear sites in Iran. By, was it Monday morning, he declared mission accomplished and we have peace, and he declared a ceasefire, claimed a ceasefire. Now we're seeing a fragile ceasefire situation. We'll see if that holds or not, but that's not it. We then had the New York mayoral
Democratic primary.
The Democratic primary, which Zohran Mamdani, a self-described Democratic Socialist, has won. And the finance press is kind of going nuts about this. Wall Street Journal says Wall Street panics over the prospect of a socialist running New York City. So there's a lot for us to catch up on. I think let's begin with the war. Let's begin with Trump's, he finally crossed that line. And this was a president that campaigned on ending forever wars. So it's a pretty big deal that now you have him playing from the same warmonger playbook as Biden. Let's look at first. What is this? Why did Trump bomb Iran?
I think to understand that question, we have to really zoom out a little bit and take a look at the big picture of the decline of U.S. imperialism. We've discussed before how after World War II, and especially after the fall of the Soviet Union, the United States was in this preeminent position where it could basically dictate terms to the rest of the world. We've seen that the world has been transformed, though, over the last 30 or so years. You have the rise of China, above all. You have the reemergence of Russia as regional and to some degree even worldwide imperialist powers. And if once as Lenin explained, once the world is divided up against different imperialist powers, there's always the possibility for a redivision. But if someone else wants to get a slice of someone else's cake, that they're going to have to fight over it one way or another. We've seen in the recent period, due to the declining economic power of the United States, that it has had to retrench in different regions of the world. And you've had these other regional powers like China and Russia sort of encroaching on that. And in order to stop this sort of downward slide, U.S. imperialism and its mainly Western European allies have tried in various ways to undercut the rise of an alternative pole of economic and military power. But of course, what we've seen that is that when they tried to go after Russia through Ukraine, they've hit a brick wall there. The sanctions didn't work. All the military equipment and advisors and terrorist attacks and sabotage and everything that they've done to try to undermine Russia to bring about regime change in Russia didn't work. And in fact, Russian imperialism is now stronger than ever. So then the next line of attack was the Iran war. And I think all of this really has to be understood in the context of the biggest geopolitical rival for U.S. imperialism, which is Chinese imperialism. And these are through different angles. They're trying to go after China and the rise of, for shorthand, the BRICS grouping, these other sort of medium regional imperialists and economic powers that are actually being pushed together more than ever, precisely because of the arrogance of U.S. imperialism and its attack dog in the Middle East, Israel. Although sometimes it's hard to tell which one is the tail and which one is the dog, I think it really doesn't matter in some sense because there's a symbiotic relationship there. This is Israel represents an outpost of U.S. imperialism. Obviously, individual Zionists like Netanyahu have their own interests and their own priorities and stuff, but ultimately it's a symbiotic relationship. So it's not so much a question of, did Trump all of a sudden become a neocon, or was he co-opted by the so-called deep state and all that? Rather that he's ultimately expressing the logic of imperialism, U.S. imperialism in decline, that has to try to push back to reassert its position on a world stage. And so far, it's going very, very badly for them.
Right. You can see that in the last 5 months, the U.S. has been on a pretty different trajectory than it was under Biden. And I think the Ukraine war was the tipping point where U.S. imperialism faced this reality that it couldn't deny, that it was no longer the power that it used to be. I mean, this has been like a slow motion, horrific defeat for NATO and for the West in Ukraine. So Trump comes in and basically admits this in so many words. I mean, this whole America First, this retrenching, he's wanting to bring back the focus to the Western Hemisphere, but also primarily to pivot to the main rival. And so you can see there is, in all the, we've been talking about, there's madness, but there's also method to the madness. The thread of everything he's trying to do on the global stage is to manage the decline of US imperialism. Now, having the aim of managing that decline is one thing. That doesn't mean that he's going to be able to do it in a competent way. And I think that...
Or at all.
Yeah, in the cabinet that he's got, I mean, it's like you can see a group of people that are acting pragmatically, eclectically, sort of blindly, like there's not like a clear strategy at every turn. You can see that at each turn, Trump is basically kind of making it up as he goes. I mean, in some ways, none of this has gone very well for him. The idea of the trade war, all these deals he was going to strike, it's all been a total flop. The idea of reindustrializing the United States, if anything, he's on the brink of plunging the US into pretty severe recession on the horizon. And so none of this has been able to play out. If he's trying to pivot to focus on China, then it seems a lot of people, and especially among his base, will be wondering, why get into another war with Iran? You know, why, if the idea is to pull out and focus, why did he start this war?
The American imperialist ruling class, right, just like any other ruling class, is not about to just commit suicide as a class, right? They're not going to just let's take a look at the Middle East, right? This is an area rich in oil, strategically positioned, right? How much trade goes through the Suez Canal? How much oil, 20% of the world's oil supply goes through the Strait of Hormuz. Is the American ruling class just going to say, oh, geez, it's a very important area, we'll just leave it alone, and other people will have to take care of it, and we'll just pull out the Navy and pull out they're not going to do that, right? Even if they have in mind some retrenchment, it's very hard for a ruling class to give up all that power, all that prestige, and all that wealth that goes with it, right? And of course, Trump doesn't just come in as a president with a clean slate that he can write. You know, there's a certain traditions and certain entanglements that the U.S. is already involved in there. Like, for example, Israel, right? The establishment of the state of Israel originally in 1948, the idea there was that U.S. imperialism would have this country they could lean on, could be a proxy for their power in the Middle East. Ironically, by the way, this war with Iran brings back historical issues there. You know, in 1953, the Iranians had elected a prime minister. It was a populist prime minister, Mossadegh, right? And he nationalized the oil companies in Iran. That was very unpopular with U.S. imperialism, British imperialism. They organized a coup. They installed the Shah Reza Pahlavi, right? He instituted a brutal dictatorship that lasted until 1979. His military was bought and paid for by the United States and trained by his secret police, the Savak, bought and paid for, trained by the United States. So for a period of time, U.S. imperialism had two countries they could lean on in that. Of course, 1979, there's a revolution, overthrows the Shah. That creates increased instability for the United States in the Mideast. Of course, the Soviet Union collapses. That gives them a little bit more place a little room to play, so to speak. But in the 1980s, they used Iraq against Iran in a kind of a proxy war. They had that going. But then later, George W. Bush comes into office. What does he do? The same country, the same dictator, Saddam Hussein, that they used against Iran, they took him out. When they took him out, what happened? Iran actually was able to increase its influence. So now that became a stronger enemy, so to speak, for the U.S. to fight against in the Middle East. So it's like Trump inherits all that. He may not like it, but he inherits that, and he can't just ignore that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when we say that things haven't gone well so far for U.S. imperialism's efforts to do this, yeah, this idea, this sort of bigger historical logic of retrenching to the Americas, of focusing on the resources here, and sort of more deeply uniting the economies or dominating the economies in America's backyard made a certain sense, but they just can't get out of these other parts of the world. And we already explained what's happened in Ukraine. And with China, its attempts there through the trade war, the U.S. thought it held the cards there. It obviously did not hold the cards there, just like it didn't hold as many cards as it thought it had in Ukraine. Now we see in Iran, the New York Times daily podcast this morning was crowing about how the real winner of all this is Israel, obviously, right? I mean, they're Zionist sycophants, but the reality is the Iranians are the ones that came out stronger. The regime change, the shock and awe of the initial blitzkrieg, trying to decapitate the leadership, trying to take out different key targets, that didn't lead to an uprising in Iran. If anything, it pulled all the various peoples of Iran together, from the Persians to the Azeris to the Zoroastrians to the Kurds and the Baluch and all these other different people. They actually were pushed together in the face of imperialist aggression by Zionism and U.S. imperialism. It actually backfired on them. And on the military side of things, Israel's supposedly impenetrable Iron Dome was full of holes. I mean, it was more like a sieve. I mean, it was supposed to be an airtight security defense against any hostile attacks, but it was designed to stop small little rockets and handheld missiles fired maybe from Lebanon or from Gaza or the West Bank or something like that. It wasn't designed, and it cannot stop some of the more advanced hypersonic missiles that Iran has succeeded in developing over the last period. So although all sides are claiming victory, I really think, I believe the reports that say that it was Netanyahu who was sort of pushing for the ceasefire, despite in public saying, we could go on forever. We're the chosen land and the chosen people and all this kind of stuff. And I think a lot of people in Israel are going to be questioning, how is it that the port of Haifa has been destroyed, that oil refineries have been destroyed, that the IDF headquarters has been deeply damaged, the Mossad headquarters. How did this happen? I thought we were invulnerable to these kinds of attacks, and again, it's backfired. It's blown up completely in the face of U.S. imperialism. And just quickly, just to relate this back to Lenin's imperialism, where he explains that in these inter-imperialist struggles where U.S. imperialism is trying to hold back China and Russia above all, it's a struggle for markets, for spheres of influence, for natural resources, and so on. And it's not as crude as this, but you better believe they'd like to get their hands on the natural resources of Russia or Iran, to use them to support their economies and to prop up their crumbling financial markets, their crumbling bond markets, their the discontent in the United States, which is ultimately a function of the lowering quality of life, which is a function of the crazy disparity of wealth and the enrichment of the richest people, the billionaires in this country versus the majority. They wanted to cut across that to get some of those resources. So it really is a return to the great power politics that you saw, a couple centuries ago and a few decades ago, but before World War II. And that's something that obviously is very uncomfortable for the United States after having enjoyed such a prominent position for so long. And now it's going to have to deal with the consequences of that. And part of the consequence of that is that they can no longer afford to have the U.S. working class have the quality of life that it had before. And that's going to mean austerity in different forms. It's going to be a tax on democratic rights. We've already seen this, crackdowns and so on, because they're preparing for an almighty explosion of the class struggle that we're going to see at some point, at some stage in this country. And a lot of people decried the election of Trump as a swing to the right and so on. We've explained that this is a distorted way of trying to find a solution to class problems, jobs, healthcare, education, all these kinds of quality of life things. And eventually you are going to see a big swing to not even the right or left, you could say, in this country, but towards class issues. I think that's one of the things we have to emphasize. And so when we say that war is a handmaiden of revolution, doesn't mean that the revolution is next week or anything like that. But war and launching wars in Ukraine and Iran, and trade wars even, which are really just another form of war, another form of foreign policy, imperialist foreign policy, they can eventually blow back, and the chickens can and do eventually come home to roost.
I have a question on the balance sheet, because we're hearing all this propaganda: victory for the United States, victory for Trump. Trump says he completely
Totally obliterated.
totally obliterated the Iranian nuclear plan, and it's a wonderful victory for the United States. Here's my question: you mentioned about the casualties in Israel. How many casualties were there in Israel? How many people died? How many people were wounded? Why are we not being given those numbers?
As far as I know, it's very, very few, actually. It's like 25 or 30 killed, which is actually pretty remarkable given the number of missiles that rained down on Israel, which shows that they were trying to avoid, in my opinion, the Iranians were trying to avoid a wider conflagration by having a mass casualty event. Remember, Steve Witkoff said, if we can't come to a deal and it goes to war, we're going to have a mass casualty event. They were, with relative pinpoint accuracy, taking out different targets. For example, that hospital that got hit, and the Israelis were crying about how dare they attack a hospital when they've destroyed 36 hospitals in Gaza, and they keep attacking these places, killing men, women, and children. The damage to that hospital was because it was right next to, I think, Mossad headquarters or an IDF headquarters, intelligence headquarters, and the aftershock of that is what damaged the hospital. That wasn't the target. And what did they do? They put this place right in the middle of a civilian population to use it as a human shield, which is, of course, the cynical accusation they make against the Palestinians in Gaza and so on. So I actually think the actual casualties are relatively few, and yet we're going to find out just what the change is, how much lower the population of Israel is now, because thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, maybe as many as 2 million people are trying to get the heck out of there on the basis of this, taking yachts back and forth to Cyprus to evacuate. All these people who claimed that this was their God-given homeland suddenly realized that maybe it's not after all. And so, I mean, the after effects of this very brief war, what Trump called the 12-day war, which I think is not a great name for it. I think we're at the beginning of the repercussions of this, and I wouldn't put too much money on the so-called ceasefire, which, as you said, was basically unilaterally declared by Donald Trump. There's no agreement, there's no paperwork, there's no negotiations. I'm not so sure that's going to hold for very long.
Right. As recently as Friday, Israeli officials were saying that the Iron Dome its efficiency had gone down from 90% last week, which is already a pretty big breach, to 65%. I mean, Tel Aviv and Israel was being bombarded in a way that it hadn't been in modern history, if ever. And so this was coming through, and yes, they were precision strikes, but it's clear that the Iranian capacity to bombard Israel, by the way, was totally unaffected by the US strikes. And none of this, as far as completely and totally obliterating the nuclear enrichment capacities, it's been shown to be a complete lie.
Iran's nuclear ambitions have been obliterated.
I mean, there's been a lot of lies in the course of this short war, but U.S. intelligence has come out, it's been leaked, that their assessment is that they totally obliterated the entrances to 2 different facilities. Nothing beneath the entrances has even been affected, and it's what a lot of people suspected. Like, it's been minimal damage, so they didn't get regime change. They didn't do anything. They said, U.S. intelligence is now saying, at the most, they've set back Iranian nuclear enrichment capacity by just a few months. Nothing that they claim to have achieved has actually been achieved. And if anything, they've just destabilized the region more.
Not to mention that those sites were basically emptied already of all, important targets. The uranium's gone missing now. Nobody knows where it is. Well, some people know where it is, but Western intelligence has lost track of it. Like 450 kilograms of relatively highly enriched uranium has just gone missing. Iran is no longer going to cooperate with the IAEA, which basically served as Western intelligence to give away the locations of the people that they should try to decapitate in the first place. So it's hard to say. I mean, there was a fatwa issued in Iran, I think in 2003, against the creation of nuclear weapons. But you better believe that there's more and more people in there. First of all, there's people in Iran right now that are saying, why should we stop the bombardment? We've got the upper hand. We've got them on the ropes. We should keep at it. But I think probably under pressure from Russia and China, they're being like, look, let's not blow this whole thing out right now. Let's take this step by step. People want to keep going, but there's going to be a lot of people questioning, well, why don't we create a nuclear bomb? Look what that's the only reason why they backed off on North Korea finally. So fatwa or not, we might have to rescind that. Conditions have changed, and maybe we have to go for it. And even the Russians, and I believe the Chinese, who didn't want Russia, they didn't want Iran to go down that route. They've basically said, look, based on these attacks, you may have no choice now but to do that. And the reason they don't want it is because then that would mean the Saudis would want nuclear weapons. Does Turkey have nuclear weapons? Maybe it hosted some American ones, but there'd be like an arms race across the region, and we'd be back to the 1970s where everyone was worried about a nuclear winter, killing off the planet.
But the rule set down by the West, by U.S. and by Israel, is that only Israel gets to have a nuclear bomb. They can choose only one force that gets to have this weapon and bully everyone else in the region.
And they're not part of the IAEA. They have no inspectors, weapons inspectors tracking their weapons. It's such a cynical double standard, isn't it?
Yeah.
And U.S. imperialism gets to have nuclear weapons that can destroy the world 12 times over, right? That's okay. The only country in the world that's ever used the atomic bomb is the United States, right? It was used against a power that didn't have the atomic weapons either, right? Japan.
And Netanyahu's the line that he keeps using is that we can't let the world's most dangerous regime have the world's most dangerous weapon. The most dangerous regimes already have those weapons. And it's the task of the entire working class of the world to disarm the bully of the real bully of the Middle East.
And of the world.
Yeah.
I also, though, my understanding is there were many more people wounded in Israel from those attacks on the missile. And it sounds like the casualty rate in terms of death and wounded were much higher than what Israel normally get. Like when the Hezbollah was sending rockets and stuff, the numbers were much higher, which basically shows a lie to this propaganda that, Netanyahu's going to protect people in Israel. Remember, he was like, we got it. We don't like Netanyahu, but we got to support him because he's going to protect people. Well, he was the prime minister when Hamas attacked Israel, and he's the prime minister now who started this war. So people have to ask if he really does, if he's really a good protector,
And since it's a wonderful democracy over there, they've banned people from videotaping and sharing any examples of the success of the Iranian airstrikes. And I think it was Ben Gvir who said that watching Al Jazeera should be a crime. It's
well, why
it's
is that?
disgusting.
Right?
I wonder why.
I wonder why they ban those. The fact is that capitalism worldwide, imperialism worldwide, is in a severe crisis. The ceasefire that Trump has established is not a very stable ceasefire. All of the reasons that this war started, which Netanyahu needs constant war in order to maintain his power, all of those problems are still exist. This war could restart very soon, or maybe in the not so distant future. There's no chance for peace. There's no chance for a good life for the working class in the Middle East, North Africa, South Asia, that whole area, unless the working class takes power, unless we get to a socialist federation of the Middle East, North Africa, South Asia as part of a world socialist federation.
Yeah, speaking of instability, look at Donald Trump. One moment he's saying, we know where the Ayatollah is, but we can kill him whenever we want, basically. And then he says, well, it's politically incorrect to talk about regime change, but maybe if the regime isn't a good regime, maybe that's what's got to happen. Make Iran great again, MAGA. Totally nuts. And then unconditional surrender. That's what we demand. And then, now it's a ceasefire. It's just all over the place. And like we said, none of the aims, stated or unstated, above all, regime change in order to destabilize the region and destabilize the growing power of BRICS vis-a-vis U.S. imperialism, nor the alleged, WMDs, weapons of mass destruction, which U.S. intelligence agencies, Western intelligence agencies, the IAEA all agreed that Iran was not working actively on a nuclear weapons program. Even Tulsi Gabbard, who cowardly, I would say, not that we support her in any way, but she was supposed to be someone of principle who was going to at least whisper in the ear of the emperor, whisper truth in his ear. And she even backed down and said, well, I guess whatever the president says, because he's a high level intelligence agent. I don't know if you knew, or if we've mentioned this before, but he doesn't read. He doesn't read the daily intelligence briefings. So Tulsi Gabbard is packaging the daily intelligence briefings as a Fox News clip so that he can watch that, and because that's how he consumes media. That's how he learns about the world. So anyway, he knows best. The emperor knows best. and all these people backed him. I mean, Pete Hegseth obviously had some misgivings. J.D. Vance, who pretends he's anti-forever wars, and even Rubio, who appeared to have changed his neocon spots when he was appointed Secretary of State. All of them are basically, again, following the fundamental interests of U.S. imperialism, which is to try to find a way out of this desperate mess they find themselves in. And I would qualify all of what's happening right now as one big strategic defeat for U.S. imperialism.
Absolutely, that's the thread. And despite this logic, I mean, Trump has composed a cabinet of yes men who will do whatever he wants to the best of their ability. But even that's not working out very well because the messaging has been totally different. Rubio, after Israel started its attack, Rubio said, we had nothing to do with this, warned Iran, don't target U.S. Targets. This has nothing to do with the U.S. And then Trump comes in and said that was an excellent attack and actually starts to say we and claim responsibility and started on the provocations. J.D. Vance has now been doing the rounds, trying to do some damage control. And of course, this is obviously at odds with the opposition to forever wars. This was a big theme of the campaign. It's a big theme of Trumpism.
They said, he will start a war. I'm not going to start a war. I'm going to stop wars.
And I was proud to be the first president in decades who did not get the United States into any new wars. I took us out of endless and ridiculous wars. Remember when I was running, they were all screaming, he'll start a war. He's that kind of a guy. No, I'm the one that got him not to fight.
The years of war, weakness, and chaos will be over. I don't have wars. I could stop wars with a telephone call. I will end every single international crisis that the current administration has created. Our opponents inherited a world at peace and turned it into a planet of war. We're in a planet of war. We will measure our success not only by the battles we win, but also by the wars that we end, and perhaps most importantly, the wars we never get into. My proudest legacy will be that of a peacemaker and unifier. That's what I want to be, a peacemaker and a unifier.
Steve Bannon has been one of these figures that's like a spokesperson for MAGA. A couple weeks ago said two things created the Trump coalition: the 2008 financial collapse and the Iraq war. And what he's saying is that there's millions of households, I think millions of them voted for Trump, who felt personally used and abused by U.S. imperialism, by this machine, by all of these lies about weapons of mass destruction and all the false pretexts for going into Iraq and all the lies that came out the whole stream. And it's George Bush, but it's Clinton before him, it's Obama, Biden, and now Trump is joining in with the same messaging. I saw that J.D. Vance went on Meet the Press Sunday morning, right after the attack, and he's trying to square the circle, and he says, I certainly empathize with Americans who are exhausted after 25 years of foreign entanglements in the Middle East. I understand the concern, but the difference is that back then we had dumb presidents, and now we have a president who actually knows how to accomplish America's objectives. I don't think that's going to convince people, and this is really the big fault line in MAGA. This is the thing that is making people, I mean, this has really shaken the MAGA base. I don't know if this has obliterated the MAGA coalition just yet, but it certainly is a lot more tenuous than it was even a year ago. I mean, Trump's polling has been down among his own base. He hasn't followed through with any of his promises. Once the economic repercussions of this war start to play out, it'll be in a very dangerous position. But I know that there's a lot of polling being done, including by some that are favorable. There's one poll that was a big data pollster that's been rating Trump favorably more than any other major outlet. And the director of that pollster said, if Trump pulls the trigger, this spells the end for MAGA. Say goodbye to it. I mean, there's been all kinds of indications that that coalition is fragmenting, and you can understand why.
And look, ultimately, it has to fragment because, as we've explained before, it's a cross-class coalition that has sucked a lot of working-class people, again, as we said earlier, looking for solutions to their class problems that ultimately neither major political party, neither bourgeois party can solve. So eventually, it's gonna fracture. The problem, of course, is just as there's no alternative on for those who consider themselves on the left, there's no alternative yet to MAGA. So I think the fault lines are there, and I think they could break apart fairly quickly. If, for example, you had the labor leaders, if they had some guts, and they came out and said, look, screw both of these parties. We need a class independent Labor Party, Socialist Party, whatever they want to call it, but we're going to be class independent. We're going to run labor, working class candidates up and down the ballot line around the country, independent of those two parties. And we're going to fight for working class issues. And we're going to have an internationalist outlook, understanding that the interests of American workers are the same as workers all around the world. That would completely transform American politics, world politics, and that's not happening. So I think because there's no alternative, just like some people still cling to the Democrats because obviously they're not going to go over to Trumpism because of all the reactionary sides that are part of that. There's a lot of people in the Trump camp that have these class concerns that aren't going to jump over to the hated liberal, Biden, Harris, Clinton side. And so they're kind of stuck because there's no alternative. But as soon as a lead is given, and it could come in all kinds of different forms, both those parties, I think, are going to suffer severe hemorrhaging on a class basis. And that's why, of course, we're so excited by these events, because the opportunities for connecting with people on a class basis, for raising bold revolutionary socialist, revolutionary communist ideas, it is getting an echo. And I think we've had a little example of that right here in New York City, which is another reflection of this process that we're seeing unfold. And it's a messy process. There's no clear leadership. So it's this distorted polarization is being cut across with ebbs and flows and contradictory currents. But we're seeing yet another example of that with the mayoral elections. The Democratic primaries for the mayoral election in New York.
And we'll get right into that. One thing I just want to mention before we do is Sanders was in Tulsa for this campaign stop of the Fighting Oligarchy tour. And really, I think Sanders has kind of played out his role. I mean, he's played the same. We know the Sanders playbook, and it's repeated itself a couple times. He's really just trying to corral people back into the Democratic Party. He's trying to have essentially a bargaining chip to use on the DNC and say, this is the direction we should go with this party. I think that's the only real purpose of this Fighting Oligarchy tour. But despite Sanders' intentions, there was a scene in Tulsa where he received the breaking news that the U.S. had carried out this strike. And the crowd, it's not Sanders that's interesting here, it's the crowd. You saw tens of thousands of people in this massive stadium all stand up, fists in the air, no more war, in complete unison, no more war. And that was just an outline of this element that exists in the political landscape. Sanders is like toying with it, but he's not giving it a lead. He's not channeling it. Obviously, he's not saying we should organize this. If anything, he's trying to, again, corral it back into the Democrats. But you can see that sentiment exists. That's a deep American war weariness. Like the sentiment of the working class has been shaped by the last few decades. And the United States, the working class in this country does not want imperialist wars. And that's a sentiment that counts whether we're talking about Trump voters or people that have looked at the Democrats or a lot of young communists who are ready to reject both parties in the whole system.
Contrast that with Donald Trump's birthday party, 250th anniversary of the Army parade. And the pro-war camp trying to whip up this American nationalism and pride and imperialism. And you look at the pictures of the crowds, you look at the people, I mean, people look bored, the soldiers look bored, they weren't even marching in lockstep. I mean, it really was a laughable thing. And you contrast that organic response that we had in Tulsa versus this highly stage-managed, very massaged and colored up thing that they put together in Washington, also in the last 2 or 3 weeks here. And I think that's really what they're scared of. And that's precisely why Sanders and others are trying to corral people, as you say, right back into the dead end of the Democratic Party.
Can I just add back to that quote by Vance about intelligent people and non-intelligent people? See, I think it's relevant to the discussion we're about to enter. It's like, this idea that why do we have problems in the world? Why are things falling apart? If only we had intelligent people who could deal with these things. The Democrats accuse that of, Trump and these people, they're not intelligent. And then then you see Vance is accusing the Democrats of not being intelligent, but it has nothing to do with that. What it is these problems are systemic. There are real social pressures and real social forces, and there's a logic of a system that leads people in the direction that they are going, that leads the ruling class and its leaders to make the decisions that they do, and that leads to this disaster. And it doesn't have to be this way, but you would have to change the system. But here's the problem. If you work within the system, if you accept the limits of the system, if you accept the social pressures of the system, whether you're conscious of them or not, you'll be pushed in a direction that you may not want to go. That's the one thing we have to be clear. That's why we're revolutionaries. That's why we're communists. That's why we believe in systemic change. Because if you could change things within the system, everybody would support that. And the changes already would have happened. But you can't do that. That's the key question. That's what people have to realize.
Right. I think the question with MAGA is that this thing will fall apart at a certain stage. I think if there is another war, I mean, I think a lot of Trump voters are willing to give him a pass and to say, well, at this stage, you know, he got in and he got out. We're not sucked into another war for now. And so some people, I think, rather than completely obliterate the whole coalition, I think some people are already done with it. Some people have, those illusions are breaking down. What I'm saying is that the remaining illusions are now weakened, that this has really shaken the base. Once the economic factors actually take effect, once you have the prices of oil and energy prices and the inflationary effects of that, plus the trade war, once it really becomes clear that the US is headed back into a massive crisis, that this whole golden age of America was a complete fiction, that's when you're really going to see the whole thing fall apart. And when it does, then it's a question of where does that discontent go and where does it get channeled? And the United States is headed inexorably for that point in time when those illusions break down. People aren't going to go back to the Democrats. At least there's a lot of a massive section of the population that has had it with both of those parties. And they're going to be looking for another alternative. I mean, remember those polls that said how many millions of people wanted to just burn down the whole system? The anger hasn't gone away. If anything, it's being tortured and intensified. It's going to come out in an explosive way at a certain point. And that's really where this phenomenon of Trumpism will end up.
And I think world events and events here at home are more interconnected than ever. I mean, in the past, obviously, you had the anti-Vietnam War movement that had an impact at home. You had the anti-Iraq war and Afghanistan and all that kind of stuff. But it feels like more than ever, not just the economies of the world are more interconnected, but what's happening all around the world. In the past, I mean, you know, Americans had a relatively good quality of life relative to the rest of the world. They could kind of ignore what was happening in other parts of the world. At least big chunks of the population could ignore it. Now, every little thing affects them. I mean, the fact that the dollar, for example, isn't the world's reserve currency anymore. I mean, it is de facto, but it's nothing like it was in the past. I mean, people are investing in gold. I mean, gold prices have gone nuts over the last couple of years, in crypto, in property, speculating on the stock market, anything, because they just don't trust the fundamentals of U.S. capitalism anymore. And I agree. Where is all that energy going to go? That's the big question. I think it's going to go in a direction that could be harnessed towards systemic change, towards revolution, but that requires a revolutionary party, an organization, and the kinds of numbers and educated, trained cadre, as we call them, to be able to harness that energy and put it to useful work. And that's the real big question, is how quickly can our listeners who haven't joined the RCA yet come join our ranks and help us in that process?
Right. And a lot of people along the way are going to be now watching what's happening in New York. I mean, this is just to tie this in. This is an editorial that came out today from the Wall Street Journal. It's entitled "The People's Republic of New York City." Let me just read the first line of it. "The easy victory by Zohran Mamdani in Tuesday's Democratic mayoral primary marks a sharp left turn for New York City. But perhaps more important is that it signals the rise of left-wing economic populism as a leading alternative to the MAGA Republicans." That's the take from the mouthpiece of Wall Street. They're clearly worried about what this means. I saw there was an executive of a hedge fund, Dan Loeb. He's the chief executive of hedge fund Third Point. He wrote on X, "It's officially hot commie summer." So the bourgeois are a little bit worried about what this means. I think a lot of young people are looking at this with excitement, and they're saying, okay, well, we got a socialist win in New York.
One thing is, we, as the Revolutionary Communist America, are only too happy to take down Wall Street, take down the capitalist media, take down the establishment, and all their politicians, whether that's Eric Adams or Cuomo or, whatever. Definitely would love to see the working class defeat all these people. But the question is what will it take to truly defeat them? Are they going to be able to provide the reforms and the benefits that they're promising, or are they not going to be able to? How can they defeat that power structure? We know the power structure is afraid of what is being unleashed by Zohran Mamdani and the DSA. And why is that? Because they are afraid of people starting to wake up and question capitalism, starting to look towards the ideas of socialism. We know they're afraid of that. But we also have to ask, is the Zohran Mamdani mayoralty and his campaign, is that really going to bring about what he's promising?
Yeah, and I just wanted to remind folks that if you haven't read our U.S. Perspectives document yet, which was just approved unanimously by our successful Congress that we just held in Philadelphia a few weeks ago, we actually predicted this, precisely what this mouthpiece of the American bourgeoisie is saying, that the only way that the Democrats can get out of their current funk is to adopt this left economic populism or left populism, to sort of give left cover to their policies to try to re-energize people. But of course, we understand that they're doing it. There's obviously a lot of very well-meaning and intended people in the rank and file of around these these kinds of movements. But at the top, it's a cynical ploy, again, to try to keep people within safe limits. They want to keep things from getting out of control. And I think we should probably have a full episode analyzing, the mayoral primaries that we just had, and talking about, look, the fact that they're sort of in a panic already, when if you look at his policies, they're actually more like sort of light progressive policies that fit within the bounds of certain aspects of the Democratic Party. He's not calling for the nationalization of Wall Street or anything like that, or the expropriation of the landlords that are ripping everybody off in this hyper expensive city. He's talking about having a handful of city-run grocery stores, when the grocery industry is a global industry, huge thing that you can't tackle within the limits of one city. You can't have socialism in one city or socialism in one state, or even in a country as big as the United States. It's got to be a worldwide system, and that's what we're fighting for. And so, we have to explain all these things, understanding that yes, on some level, this does represent a victory insofar as 42,000 people canvassed for him. That's a lot of human energy and enthusiasm for changing the status quo. But we're going to have to explain in a friendly way, of course, why ultimately what he's proposing is going to lead to disappointment. Because if you limit yourself to the system, as we were just saying, then you're going to hit a brick wall eventually. And that's why we have to rupture that system altogether.
Right. We're seeing echoes of 2018 here with AOC's style upset against Crowley, who was a big dominant establishment figure that all the polls thought had it in the bag when she ran for Congress in that district. You had a young person, an outsider, someone that had a combative message against the establishment. And it's true, like Cuomo is a typical establishment, had the backing of Bloomberg, was endorsed by Clinton, had all of this money, was using his reputation as someone that had already been in government, and had all this staff, and knew he was attacking Zohran for being a nobody, for having achieved nothing, for being an outsider to politics. If anything, all of that only helped the Zohran campaign. And the fact that Zohran Mamdani won, and he won, it wasn't a protracted election. There weren't all of these rounds of counting the various rankings. He won handily, and Cuomo then just basically conceded the race last night. We weren't sure if we were going to even have a result last night. It shows something about the mood in New York, the mood of the working class. Like Cuomo, Zohran puts himself forward as someone in solidarity with Palestine. This is a big poke in the eye to the Zionists that have long been dominant in New York City politics, as with so many other cities. This is a jab against the establishment. And so that's a big part of why they're worried. But just like with Sanders and AOC and the Fighting Oligarchy Tour, it's not that Zohran is taking this step in order to begin a revolution. It's not that he's trying to engage in revolutionary politics. It's not that he's trying to build a socialist movement as such. He's very clear that he's trying to rehabilitate the Democratic Party. And his campaign began after the presidential election last November, when he went up to the Bronx and started interviewing people that voted for Trump and doing, again, just like AOC was, trying to bridge the divide and say, okay, do you feel like the Democrats aren't paying attention to your needs and you're worried about the affordability crisis? Well, we need to get the Democrats back on the right track. And he's been saying these statements. If you want the working class to go back to the Democratic Party, then we need the Democrats to change its course. You can see the whole perspective from Mamdani is to change course of the Democrats. Our whole perspective is to destroy that party of the ruling class and to expose both of the ruling parties of the system. And I think that a lot of people on the left, a lot of people that are excited by Mamdani's campaign, don't understand why class independence is so important. And why, I mean, a lot of them, they seem to frame this position of ours like an irrational obsession with like purity politics. A lot of people would say, Mamdani, at least he's doing something. At least he's trying to take a step. And yeah, he's not totally there to wave a Bolshevik flag, but at least he's raising the visibility of socialism. He's fighting for some reforms. This is a great start. Why shouldn't we support him?
I'll accept that Mamdani means well and that he wants to do the best he can to improve the conditions of working people. But if he would listen to us, if he would like to engage in a discussion, we'll invite you, Zohran Mamdani. You have a invitation to come to our podcast, and we'd love to have a discussion and debate with you on this and on what is the right way forward. But the first thing I'd start with is what is causing the problems that are affecting working class people? Why is the standard of living going down for working class people in this country and around the world? Why is there more and more instability? We would say it's a crisis of capitalism. Capitalism is in a decline, a historic decline, not just in the United States, worldwide. And you cannot fix the system. You have to overthrow the system and transform society along socialist lines. We have wonderful technology. We have millions of people with potential labor. You put labor and technology and resources together, and you could make a world where everyone will have plenty, not just enough, but have more than enough. We can have a much better life. But you can't do that within the confines of capitalism. In the United States, the two major capitalist political parties that represent the Democrats and the Republicans, both of them ultimately are in crisis. The crisis of the Republicans led to MAGA takeover. The crisis of the Democrats is unfolding in front of our eyes. I just want to mention, this was in the New York Times a few days ago. They have an article, Inside the Democratic National Committee, Chaos and a Shortage of Cash. So you could just see there are all kinds of battles going on in between. You got the governor, Newsom in California. He's one wing of the party. He wants to go towards the right. He's on Steve Bannon's program. I guess he was on Charlie Kirk's program. You got that. You got another group of right-wing Democrats meeting in Congress. And then you have this other wing that says, wait a minute. What we should do is bring the Democrats towards this kind of left populism. There's that kind of I want to mention they had this demonstration a couple weeks ago. Was it No Kings, right? And there was the actor Mark Ruffalo was at that demonstration. He was interviewed on television. I like him, by the way. I think he's a very good actor. But he was talking about how how such a small percentage of the population owns a tremendous amount of wealth. And then he linked it to that demonstration against Trump. But, we have to ask Mark, and again, I think he's a great actor, but how did that wealth disparity happen? It wasn't just under Trump. It wasn't just like since January 20th that a small group of people own mostly everything in the economy, right? This is a byproduct of capitalism. It's not the tax system. It's not Trump. It's capitalism. It's the fact that the capitalists exploit the working class and basically take most of the proceeds, the value that's created by that labor, ends up in the pockets of the capitalist class. So it's not just the simple thing that it's caused by Trump or his policies or his tax policies, which is the same argument put forward by Bernie Sanders, and it's the same argument put forward by Mamdani.
To bring it back down to the class issues at stake here, it's really interesting that he went up to the Bronx and asked people what their complaints were. And it sounds like almost all of the reasons why they voted for Trump was some sort of class question. You better believe that the RCA is going to be on the streets of New York asking people, did you vote for Zohran. And if they did, we're going to say why. And when they give us an answer that's obviously going to have some kind of class content, we're then going to link that and connect that to our program and explain our revolutionary vision for how we can actually transform things by going beyond the bounds of capitalism. So I think this is going to open huge possibilities for us. Obviously, we do have to put the warning out there that there could be big disappointment, because if he doesn't go beyond the bounds of capitalism, he's not going to achieve very much. But at the same time, we can inspire people with this vision for a different way of organizing society, a different way of doing politics. And that's that I think comrades will find that, our listeners will find that if they check out our program at our website.
And I think that the question of the program is fundamental for any kind of politics. If you want to have a guiding thread, see, we were saying earlier, Trump and his cabinet is trying to manage this decline of U.S. imperialism, and they're blindly making turns at every opportunity. It's like there's no consistent direction where everything is going.
Like a Roomba, right?
Like a Roomba vacuum. He's got the negotiating skills going straight into a wall and then some other direction he reached another wall. I mean, you can't do politics that way. And if you don't have a program that uses class war methods and that has an objective of breaking with capitalism and breaking with the capitalist institutions and the capitalist parties, then you're never going to move forward beyond this system. You'll never take a step in the direction of moving forward. And people say, well, at least it's a reform, at least it's a small improvement. The improvements won't come. And the strategic steps that need to happen will also not come. I mean, as Marxists, we understand the working class is an element in society, but it needs to be politically organized in a conscious way as workers. You need a class-independent party. And that's not purity politics. It's simple class politics. And if we don't have that, I mean, the whole question of the program is, like Tom was saying, why do we have these problems in society? Why is the standard of living going down? For us, we have a Marxist analysis of this, and it's an analysis of power in society. Power isn't just some amorphous thing. Everybody has a little bit of power, or getting elected into the mayoral seat gives you power. That's not how power works. There is a capitalist state. And that's the entire apparatus is the question of power, and that is dominated by another class. And that class's ownership of the means of production, of finance capital, of the bank, you're going up against the billionaires. And the social relations, you're talking about private property. That's power, that's capitalism. Those are the lines you have to be willing to cross if you actually want to deliver any kind of real reform, any real improvement. And if you don't recognize those things as the obstacles, if those aren't your parameters, then by default, you can already say that the thing is going to be doomed. Sometimes socialist activists say, we have to just capture the Democratic Party line and win an election. Well, who's capturing who? How did that work out for AOC, who was going to be an insurgent candidate and go in there and be combative? She was totally captured by the swamp of the Democratic Party. She became a second Nancy Pelosi. There was no fight back, and there certainly wasn't any step towards the creation of a mass working class party. That's the reason that we don't support Zohran. As happy as we are to fight back against the establishment, to see the Zionists poked in the eye politically by this election result, to see the panic on Wall Street, we're happy about those things. But strategically, we want a real working class party with a real class war program that has a real chance of actually delivering improvements. And I think it will be a disappointment.
Can I just say, if Zohran is listening, I'd ask him this. I'd say, look, which class is the vast majority of New York a member of? Is it the ruling class? Is it the capitalist class? Or is it the working class? I think we know he would answer the working class. So does that working class deserve its own political party? Can it have at least its own political party separate from the Democrats and Republicans? And here's another question. Since so many people are disgusted with the Democratic Party, look at the polls, right? In fact, I saw somebody who was working with Zohran's campaign yesterday from the so-called Working Families Party, which is not a genuine Working Families Party. If it was, we would support it. But they themselves said, this person said on the television, they said, the Democratic Party was so discredited, we had to have a program to try to bring people back into the Democratic Party. So here's my question. Why do that? Why bring people back? Why couldn't you build that 40,000 strong volunteer corps that would be the core of a new workers' party that could represent the vast majority in the city? Those are my questions.
Yeah, and I think what separates the Revolutionary Communists of America from most politics in this country, I mean, I think if you ask most Americans, whether they like politics, they're probably going to like roll their eyes in disgust, because the way the bourgeois do politics, it's all about cheap little tactics, winning points, little victories here and there, no real strategy. And that's what differentiates us from them and from the politics as usual. We have a strategy, and it's all outlined in our program. It's basically explains, if you read our program, it explains exactly how we envision taking today's situation, today's potential for reorganizing society, and taking it all the way to the world socialist revolution. And that's why I think everybody listening, and our comrades in particular, really need to revisit our program, study it, because we're going to have to be very agile in explaining these things on the streets to people when they have questions. Look, Zohran's victory is not just news in New York. It's not just news in the US. It's all over the world now. People all over the world are wondering, is it true that you have a Socialist People's Republic of New York now? Obviously, that's not the case. I mean, Zohran's not calling for socialism in one city. But we've got to be able to explain to people what we mean by a socialist strategy, a revolutionary communist strategy, versus this disgusting, dirty little tactic games that these people focus on, like a Roomba robot.
Right, and a lot of the so-called, like the self-described socialists that have been elected since the 2018 wave and the rise of DSA, the rise of like democratic socialism as some kind of a force in the political landscape, they have gotten into office as Democrats. The signs that you see in windows all around New York City, they say, Zohran Mamdani, Democrat for mayor. He's running as a Democrat. And so the socialist label, it'll be trotted out by the right wing. You're going to see all kinds of red baiting. I mean, it's already beginning. I think it's actually good for us that we have socialism in the headlines. We can have more discussions about what that means. But he's trying to make promises. In some ways, it's kind of like a democratic socialist version of Trump's promises for 3 days from now, you're going to have the best jobs and you're going to have a growing economy and all of this. Well, Mamdani's version of this is you're going to have lower rent, you're going to have free buses, you're going to have more affordable groceries. And if you have those promises made, and then people have illusions and they go for it, and then, of course, he's not going to deliver. I mean, we can say that right now. You're not going to have an improvement of life within the limits of capitalism, because the obstacles in his way is private property. If you really wanted to lower rent, if you really wanted to lower groceries and provide good jobs and healthcare, you would have to go against private property. You would have to cross the line. You would have to expropriate the banks. You'd have to expropriate the grocery store companies, the food supply chain. I mean, you would have to go against those limits. And that's
Mm-hmm.
you need revolutionary strategy for that. You would need to have a party of the working class. Mamdani isn't going to be able to steer even city council. What group of people does he have supporting him against the influence of this entrenched bureaucracy that, by the way, it's not just that the Republicans and Democrats are both parties of the ruling class. They are, and they've been for the history of this country. But you have, if anything, the Democrats are the primary institution of the American ruling class. Ever since, for the last decade, when MAGA kind of usurped the Republican Party, the GOP stopped being like a reliable pillar for the majority of the ruling class. Look how erratic and unpredictable Trump is. They can't really rely on that to be something that steers the ship in a way that they're happy with. So the Democratic Party is the only really reliable institution that they have. Is Zohran Mamdani going to claw that away from the ruling class?
I mean, the state is controlled also by the Democratic Party, and the governor basically has veto power over any of these proposals, let alone Wall Street.
Right. And the program amounts to basically tinkering with the New York budget. You're going to have tax proposals. Anything that he proposes, any tax increases on the rich has to be passed by the New York state. So you can see all these obstacles in his way. But exactly, if you wanted to actually deliver these things, you would have to have a class war method, and you would have to have a party that's capable of being wielded in a class war strategy. And that's really our concern. Again, it's not purity politics, and it's not even that we're opposed to electoralism. You know, being a communist, anyone that reads Lenin will understand, being a communist doesn't mean we're against using elections. That's not what the difference is about. We're against using elections in a way that plays into the logic of the ruling class. We want to use elections in a class way, in a revolutionary way, with working class politics. And that means the starting point is we need a party of the working class. I mean, in the United States, for the class war here, that is really the strategic step that needs to be taken. Everything else will flow from that once you have the ability to have a vehicle, a political vehicle that is free from the grip of the enemy class. And if you can't free your politics from the grip of the capitalists, if you can't break from them politically, break from their parties, break from their institutions, and break from their worldview and their logic and their method of approaching politics, then you cannot actually move against capitalism. It's not that we're opposed to reforms. We want to fight for these things. It's that we are class war realists, and that we understand in order to actually achieve any real reforms, you would have to mobilize the working class on a massive scale. You would need strike action. You would need to use the mass methods of the working class. And that's not what Zohran has in mind. That's not what the Democratic Party will ever allow.
If he had used these forces and built at least a workers' party on a city level, and let's say you had a slate of people, not just running for mayor, but a workers' candidate for comptroller, a workers' candidate for public advocate, workers' candidates for the city council, and then say we're fighting for a workers' government of the city of New York. And a workers' government in the city of New York exactly has to appeal to the working class throughout the state and throughout the country. Because who are you going to fight? You got to fight Albany. You got to fight Washington, D.C., and you got to fight Wall Street. And that's going to take the entire American working class. But yes, maybe a workers' government in the city of New York could leverage that. And you could then get, maybe as a byproduct of some of those struggles, you could get some real reforms. And when we talk about reforms that are paid for by the wealthy, not taxing a worker here to provide a benefit for a worker there, which is the way liberals and reformists do it, right? And that would have been a step. If he had done that, it doesn't matter whether he'd win or not. If he got a substantial vote, that would be building up for future victory. That's the project that could bring about a transformation in society. Unfortunately, he's made so many compromises already. He will probably make more compromises in the next period, so that if he gets elected, and for the reasons that you've just described, there's not really much he's going to be able to do.
Yeah, I would say I think we could tell people that, look, if you're disgusted by politics as usual, if you are going to have your illusions in reforms within capitalism dashed, we have to say the opposite of bourgeois politics isn't no politics, it's class politics, it's revolutionary politics, and that's what we're here to fight for.
Right.
Can I also say we are not sectarian at the RCA? If right now, if Zohran Mamdani says, you know what, I'm breaking from the Democrats, I am going to build a workers' party, we will join with you. We will fight with you. We may have disagreements on this or that, but we'll work with you if you break from the enemy class and you really want to fight these people to the end. But that's not
Don't hold your breath,
likely
Tom.
in the cards right now.
Yeah, clearly he has no indication of that. But that's what it would take. You would have to have mass forces to create a mass party. See, this is another thing that I think a lot of people on the left don't understand. A small group cannot create a mass party of the working class. Mm-hmm. It's not up to the revolutionary communists of America to form a party for the entire working class. We wouldn't be able, nobody can do that. In order to have a party of millions, you would need to mobilize millions. But you could carve off the labor movement, for instance, from the Democrats. If you had a position of class independence, if instead of these 42,000 volunteers that were canvassing for Mamdani, they had been knocking on doors and making the case for a class independent party and saying, the workers of New York are being screwed by both of these parties. They both serve the rich. Here's our program. Here's the plan that we have for actually lowering rent, for lowering the cost of living, for creating jobs for everybody. And it would have to be through the expropriation of the Fortune 500 companies. That's our program. It's not going to be an easy program, but this is the only way to actually make a better life for future generations. And this is the revolutionary platform. I think a lot of people, if given that option, would actually be quite open to it. That's the role that a cadre organization can play if they're bringing clarity. But if you want to have a mass party of the working class, exactly, if Mamdani were to initiate it, we would welcome that move with open arms, and we would be right there arguing for a revolutionary program within that class independent party. In the 90s, Tony Mazzocchi was a labor leader in the atomic and chemical workers who actually began an initiative like this, polling different unions and basically arguing for a labor party. That was a step towards class independence. See, any real step...
And we supported it.
And of course, we supported it then. We would support any kind of initiative like that today. Anyone proposing a mass party of the working class and going into the organizations of the working class, the labor movement, the unions, but even taking a class independent campaign like this, using these kinds of methods and resources, phone banking, door knocking, just discussing with workers, setting up committees in workplaces, any kind of initiative like this on a massive scale would have the potential to tap into that that discontent that exists, you can see it everywhere. You can see the outline of this.
And look, a mass party already formed isn't going to happen overnight. But even if you start out small with the perspective that you're running campaigns, not necessarily to win, you might understand you're not going to win the first couple times around, but to get the ideas out there, the program out there, get people thinking about these ideas. I am so confident, given the conditions in this country, that presented these ideas patiently in a clear way, in a class way, you would eventually get majority support for these ideas, not just in New York City, but across the entire country.
By the way, if that kind of party was set up, imagine it would shake up the unions too. Because there are a lot of union leaders. We know that they're all supporting the Democratic Party. But the rank and file is very angry. The rank and file is sick and tired of givebacks. The rank and file is sick and tired of seeing their standard of living going down. If there was this alternative, the union leaders would either have to get on board, or I bet you'd see a lot of new union leaders in the top leadership.
Yeah, I mean, the way we would run a campaign, it would be based on what are the needs of the working class, and we stick to those are our ideas. That's our program, whether we win or lose. The problem with the reformists and the liberals and everybody else is that they start with what's going to get us this victory, and then they start watering things down. They make horse trades in the back rooms and so on, and then it's just a mess, and it disgusts people. That's why we would stick to our class principles. Like, yeah, it's not purity politics, it's class politics, and we are the majority. So why don't we get the say in how societies run?
And they tailor the reforms to what's acceptable to the ruling class. Like, for example, let's take a look at this free bus. Why isn't he saying free bus and free subway? That's not
and
logical.
Free bridges.
That's not logical to say free bus and not free subway. Because if I take the bus to the subway, I pay one fare anyway. Why is he? That's tailored for the ruling class, not from the interest of the working class. Make mass transit free. But then he's posing that this is paid for by congestive pricing, which means you're taxing a chunk of the working class through these tolls to pay for the benefits of another section, and you're even tailoring those reforms to what you think the ruling class will accept. This is wrong, Zohran. I guarantee if you say we want free transit for everyone and we want an end of congestive pricing, an end of the tolls on the bridges and all that, this would have enormous popularity among the working class. Of course, the ruling class will be dead set against it. But then we say, well, that's who we're fighting. We're fighting these people, and we're going to take the money from them.
Yeah, well, whichever way this plays out, I think it's going to be a very educational experience for the working class of New York City. And it's going to be an educational experience in U.S. politics in the coming period. We're going to continue analyzing it at every turn. And we'll see. I mean, he won the primary, the Democratic primary. There's still the general election in November. We'll see how this plays out. He might have a shoe-in, but in any case, we're going to use this opportunity to discuss and clarify what a real class-independent revolutionary strategy looks like. And I'm very confident that the results that gave Zohran this win tonight, yeah, there was a lot of illusions there. Some of those illusions are going to be burnt, and I think there's going to be a lot of disappointment. But you can definitely see the potential for class-independent politics, for revolutionary politics. There's a thirst for these ideas, and it's up to the revolutionary communists of America to meet that need, to go out there boldly and energetically and explain what it's going to take to transform society within our lifetime.
100%.